would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to Film Stories. Today we're jumping back to 1986 and taking a look at a classic which was the highest grossing movie of that year, Top Gun. It has a sequel, a very belated sequel, due out in 2020. But the original film itself has all kinds of interesting asides and assortments of facts that have arisen in the years since the film's release. A lot of them you can get onto the old documentaries or the director's commentaries or production commentaries. So the film itself, the inception of the film, Jerry Bruckheimer read an article in a California magazine in 1983. It was about the creation of the Top Gun school, which was created in response to a really low enemy kill ratio for American pilots in the Vietnam War. When he read it, he saw it as, his quotes, as Star Wars on Earth. Remember, Star Wars at this point would only been 5 or 6 years prior, and was such a huge success that he saw this as being a potential money spinner. So the duo began pitching. Bruckheimer and Simpson began pitching this to studios, but for a while there was no interest. Aviator films were seen to be passé. It seemed to be a relic of the bygone era of the 50s and the 60s. But eventually Paramount went for it, and they went into pre-production. They looked for a lead first, someone to carry the film. And depending on where you look, that all kinds of different names are thrown up. Sean Penn, Swayze, Emilio Estevez, Nicolas Cage, John Cusack, Matthew Broderick, even Tom Hanks, his name came up 1 or 2 times in the various places that I looked. Matthew Modine was allegedly offered the lead role, but he objected to the film's Cold War politics. You can see that in from a few different sources. Even John Travolta reportedly was considered for the lead role because he also has a pilot's license, but the fact his career was in the doldrums at the time eventually counted against him. In the end, Tom Cruise was playing hard to get with the film, and Bruckheimer and Simpson really wanted him, but he wouldn't say yes. This story you can find in quite a few places. Eventually, they persuaded him to go up in a jet fighter. He was taken up in an A4 doing aerial combat maneuvers. He talks himself on one of the several interviews about he threw up kind of into a bath bag, put the bath bag back into his flight suit, and carried on enjoying 4 or 5 G's of aerial combat maneuvers. And when he landed, that was it. He was sold. He wanted the part. The rest of the cast was then filled out. Val Kilmer, again, this is quite a well-known story, didn't want to do the film. He had to. He was part of a studio deal that he had with Paramount, and he was forced to be in it. The studio didn't want Kelly McGillis. We'll get more about that in a second. In terms of directors, John Carpenter and Cronenberg, both very interesting choices. Apparently were in the running to direct it before Tony Scott was signed. Tony Scott only made one Hollywood film at this point, which was a vampire movie called The Hunger, which wasn't particularly successful. And that had been 4 years ago. He hadn't had another directing job since. But he did have this really striking visual style that he developed through commercials, directing commercials, and he had made an advert, a Saab advert, I think it was the Saab 900, an advert with a jet fighter in it that was really beautifully shot, and that in the end was what kind of nudged him towards in pole position to get that role. When he originally took the role, it took him a while to realise exactly what kind of film the producers wanted. Scott spoke on the director's commentary about how originally he was going for something much closer to Apocalypse Now on an aircraft carrier. He was filming a lot of stuff, shadows, in chiaroscuro, lots of slow motion, and the studio was sending it back saying, no, we don't want this, you're not allowed to shoot any more slow motion. Scott originally realised that his vision of the film and the studios was different, and he began to understand it was, in his words, more of a rock and roll movie involving jet fighters. Things weren't particularly smooth for Scott though throughout the making of the film. He was fired 3 times throughout production, officially fired 3 times. Once for shooting reels in slow motion, as we just talked about, but at this point Paramount had forbade him to shoot in slow motion, and he he kept doing so, and then one of the reels was accidentally sent to the studio, who realised that he was ignoring their instructions, and he was officially fired. The second time, the studio didn't like the way that he was shooting Kelly McGillis. They thought he was a little too... He was shooting her in a way that was perhaps slightly too lusty. Kelly McGillis was his choice. He had to fight to get McGillis into the film. But yeah, that was the second reason for his firing. The third time, he was shooting cockpit sequences with the lead actors' visors down, obscuring their faces, and the studio didn't like that either. Paramount had to pay for all of the use of military vehicles and locations in the film, but the US government was keen to subsidise that because the US Navy were trying to boost recruitment into the military. And the film, in a sense, acted as an advert for that. In fact, rates of recruitment shot up by over 500% after the film came out. But the film did cost Paramount cash for the use of those the aircraft carriers, the aircraft, etc., the military bases. There's one great story about when Scott was shooting some of those kind of sunset shots with the plane silhouettes of the planes landing, and the ship. The aircraft carrier began to turn around, and he told his military advisors that he needed to finish getting those shots, and they said it would cost him $25,000, and he just wrote a check on the spot. The film did come in over budget, and that again was one of the reasons for some of the issues between director and studio, but it went on to make a ton of money in the end, and hugely elevated Scott's career. The Navy, of course, had advisors attached to the film because they wanted to make sure the military was shown in its best light. So lots of scenes in the film were vetoed or altered, even scenes as innocuous as the changing room face-off between Maverick and Iceman. That was disputed by the film's Navy advisor, saying that the Top Gun pilots after a mission to come back and get changed. They don't feel the need to hang around in the changing rooms and play games of ego-driven brinkmanship. On the commentary for the disc as well, the military advisors point out lots of other flaws in the final cut: the drinking in the bar, the characters wearing dress whites instead of khakis, and right down to the final mission sequence, which happens straight after graduation. They debunk that and say that it simply wouldn't happen. McGillis' character, Charlie, was changed to a civilian consultant rather than a Top Gun officer because the military objected that a relationship between her character and Crew's character simply wouldn't be allowed. So, yeah, I mean, the film wasn't without its tragedy either. Art Scholl, who was one of the stunt pilots on the film, he died throughout the making of the film. The film was actually dedicated to him. He put his plane into an intentional spin for a sequence in the film, but the plane developed a problem and crashed, and he died. And in fact, both his body and the plane were never recovered. The film also needed reshoots, which when he went through test audiences, they complained that there was the romance between Maverick and Charlie didn't have enough of a kind of a sexual resolution. So the elevator scene was put in afterwards, as was the bedroom love scene with both characters. That was shot 5 months after, and yes, McGillis wears her hair in a cap in the elevator because she had different hair. She moved on to another production, as had Tom Cruise. His hair's a little bit longer as well. In the final battle sequence, the combat in the air sequence, North Korea was supposed to be the enemy in that sequence, but again, as the US diplomatic relations between the two countries were on the up at that point, the military vetoed that. And in the final scene of the film, where Tom Cruise is back in the bar, and Kenny McGillis' character comes back in, one of the fascinating little tidbits about the movie there is that he's standing in a trench, because she was taller than him, and throughout the film he wears lifts, but in that moment it's a long shot. They put her in a trench to make them look like they're the same height. In terms of music, I mean, everyone knows that Kenny Loggins' classic is forever linked to that film. But Toto and REO Speedwagon actually were offered the chance to record Danger Zone before Loggins accepted it. Bryan Adams was supposed to have a lead song on the film, but he refused to have his music on there because he felt the film glorified war, a similar attitude to Matthew Modine, who we mentioned earlier on. When the film released, though, it made all of the money, 177 million in the US alone, off a 16 million budget, and I mean, its worldwide gross is something like $360 million. Also on the press tour for that film, Cruise claims, in typical Cruise style, he came up with the whole idea of an international premiere to coincide with the press tours for promoting Top Gun. You know, he I think it's in the Jimmy Kimmel show. He said that you know, he loves premieres, and if you were going to go on a press tour, then why not do a premiere in each country? And we know from years hence that Tom Cruise does love to show up at those international premieres, take a few photos, smile a lot, and he claims that cinematic institution now, that Hollywood institution, was something of his making throughout that film. We know that a sequel's on the way. A sequel was written straight away, actually, but it was the plot sounds suspiciously similar to the plot for the 2020 film about Maverick's now an instructor, and a female pilot reminiscent of his younger self comes in and they clash, a kind of role reversal of the original film. It was originally abandoned, though, because it was thought to be too expensive, but as we now know, it is in production. Delayed, it was supposed to come out in 2019, but I think Cruise's Bruckheimer has said that Cruise's Mission Impossible injury has delayed it, but Cruise is reteaming with Joseph Kosinski of Oblivion, and he is coming out in 2020, and there's some really interesting casting starting to pop up for that movie. Please do hit the subscribe button, and we hope to see you back here soon for some more film stories.